Everyone, welcome to Anupma Biology classes. This is the third lecture in the series of Human Physiology. In this video, we will understand about human respiratory system. So, respiration is the exchange of oxygen with the carbon dioxide which is produced in cells during oxidation, and mechanism of respiration varies among different groups of animals. So, on the basis of this, respiration is divided into the two types. First one is aerobic respiration where oxygen is required, and the second is anaerobic respiration where oxygen is not required. Now, this aerobic respiration is divided into two parts. First one is the direct respiration and second is the indirect respiration. In direct respiration, the exchange of gases occur in the body cell without special respiratory organs and without the aid of blood, like in protists, aerobic bacteria, plants, sponges, coelentrates, flatworms, roundworms, and most of the arthropods. While in the indirect respiration, it involves special respiratory organs like in case of cutaneous respiration, vascular skin present for the respiration, and it takes place in the annelids, some crustaceans and amphibians. In case of buccopharyngeal respiration, it occurs with the help of buccopharyngeal cavity and it takes place in certain amphibians such as frogs and toads. In branchial respiration, exchange of gases occur by gills and it is found in many annelids, most crustaceans and mollusks, certain insects, echinoderms, all fishes and some amphibians. And the last one, that is the pulmonary respiration where the exchange of gases occur by lungs and it takes place in some amphibians and land animals like reptiles, birds and mammals. Now, this indirect respiration is divided into following phases. First one is the breathing, next is the external respiration and internal respiration. Breathing means the movement that sends fresh air or water to the respiratory tract and organs and remove foul air or water from them. While the external respiration means intake of oxygen by blood from water or air in the respiratory organs and release of carbon dioxide. And the last one is internal respiration, where the diffusing oxygen from the blood into the interstitial fluid and into the cells. It is the exchange of gases between the bloodstream and body tissues. Let's come on the topic, that is the aerobic respiration. It is the process involved in the production of energy in the presence of oxygen. And the complete balance reaction of aerobic respiration is here C6H12O6. It means glucose. It is the chemical formula of glucose. So, glucose combined with oxygen to form carbon dioxide, water, heat, and ATP. That is the form of energy. Here, heat is not an element, but the fact that is given off during aerobic respiration, which results from energy in the chemical bonds of the glucose and oxygen molecules escaping into the environment. Now, the relation between the photosynthesis and the aerobic respiration. In case of the aerobic respiration, glucose combined with oxygen to form carbon dioxide and water. You can see in the picture here glucose and oxygen combine to form carbon dioxide and water. While in case of the photosynthesis, carbon dioxide and water combine to form glucose and oxygen. So, the product of one process are the reactants of the other, and the photosynthesis makes the glucose that is used in the cellular respiration to make ATP. So, both aerobic respiration and photosynthesis are shows the important relationship, and aerobic respiration is direct opposite of photosynthesis. These both are the important part of carbon cycle, which is a pathway through which carbon is recycled in the biosphere. So, the exchange of carbon dioxide and oxygen during photosynthesis and cellular respiration worldwide helps to keep atmospheric oxygen and carbon dioxide at a stable level. Now, the anaerobic respiration. It is the process involved in the production of energy in the absence of oxygen. And the complete balanced reaction of anaerobic respiration is uh, here the yeast oxidize glucose to ethanol and carbon dioxide without utilizing oxygen. And the next one is in certain bacteria and parasitic worms, the glucose is metabolized to lactic acid without the use of oxygen and without the formation of carbon dioxide. It is also termed as fermentation. When ethanol is formed, alcoholic fermentation, and when lactic acid is formed, lactic acid fermentation. Now, human respiratory system. The respiratory system is the organs and other parts of our body involved in breathing when gaseous exchange occur. And here the parts of the respiratory system is divided into the two parts. First one is the respiratory tract and second is the respiratory organs. The respiratory tract serves as the passageway for the fresh air to flow from outside to the lungs and for the foul air to return from the lungs to the exterior, while the respiratory organs provide the surface for the gaseous exchange. This respiratory tract is a combination of different parts such as external nares, nasal chamber, internal nares, pharynx, larynx, trachea and primary bronchi. While in case of the respiratory organs, it is a pair of lungs present. This is the complete human respiratory system which start from the nasal passage, then oral cavity, pharynx, larynx, trachea, bronchi, lungs, heart and ribs. We will discuss here each and every part of respiratory system in detail. So, the first is respiratory tract. The organs that are involved in breathing are called respiratory tract, and respiratory tract consists of the first one, that is the external nares. External nares is also known as nostrils. It is a pair of slits at the lower end of the nose and it opens into the nasal chamber. These are a pair of passages in the head above the palate. Both chambers are separated by nasal septum. Each chamber has three regions. This is the diagram of the nose and nasal cavity. Now the chambers are vestibular region, respiratory region and olfactory region. Vestibular region has hairs which act as a sieve to check the entry of large dust particles, while the respiratory region acts as an air conditioning and filtering unit in breathing. Olfactory region, it acts as an organ of smell. Arising from the wall of each nasal chamber are three shallow bony ridges called nasal conchae. Now you can see in the picture, these are the parts of the nasal conchae. This is the first, that means superior nasal conchae, then the middle nasal conchae and then the inferior nasal conchae. After that, the internal layers or conchae. The nasal chambers open into the internal layers. The nasal chamber opens behind into the nasopharynx by the internal layers. Pharynx is a long tube behind the buccal cavity which is a passage of food and air, and it has three parts: nasopharynx, oropharynx and laryngopharynx. Nasopharynx is the uppermost part, then the oropharynx, it is the middle part, and after that the laryngopharynx, it is the inner part. Laryngopharynx open into two tubes, one at the front, that is trachea, and the other at the back, that is esophagus. Now this pharynx opens into the larynx. Larynx is also known as Adam's apple and it is more prominent in men than in women. It opens into the laryngopharynx by glottis and it is covered by a flap called epiglottis. During swallowing, the larynx moves upward to meet the epiglottis, which closes the glottis to check the food entry into it. Besides part of the respiratory tract, larynx also act as voice box. Now, this larynx opens into trachea. Trachea, which is also known as the windpipe. and it is thin walled tube and extend downward through the neck. Now this trachea opens into the primary bronchi. Primary bronchi, it is the middle of thorax trachea divided into two tubes. The major or primary bronchi. You can see in the picture here, the primary bronchi are located in the upper portion of the lungs with here you can see in the picture, this is the primary bronchi. Here you can see the thorax, that means trachea is divided into the two parts. This is the primary bronchi with secondary bronchi in the center of the lungs, while the tertiary bronchi are located near the bottom of these organs just above the bronchiole. It acts as an airway in the respiratory tract that conducts air into the lungs. The bronchioles gives off respiratory bronchioles which divided into alveolar duct which opens into alveolar sac, and alveolar sac act as an organ of gaseous exchange. So this structure is present inside the lungs. So this is the whole description of respiratory tract. Now the respiratory organs. It provides the surface for the gaseous exchange, and the respiratory organs are a pair of lungs. So where the respiratory organ, that means lungs, located? It present in the thoracic cavity on the sides of the heart. Thoracic cavity is closed below by the diaphragm, behind by thoracic vertebrae, laterally by ribs, and in front by sternum. Now, what is the covering of the lungs? So, the protective coats in case of the lungs is enclosed by a two membranes which is known as pleura, and pleura is the peritoneum of thorax. So, in case of the lungs, it has two membranes. First one is the visceral pleuron and second is the parietal pleuron. Visceral pleuron is the inner membrane while the parietal pleuron is the outer membrane. And the a space present between these two membranes, this is known as pleural cavity, which contains pleural fluid. Now, if the chest wall is ever pierced, atmospheric air rushes into the pleural cavity, eliminating the pressure difference across the lungs wall. This causes the lungs to collapse. This condition is called pneumothorax. So, pneumothorax is a disease. It can be a complete lungs collapse or a collapse of only a portion of the lungs. And the main symptoms of pneumothorax is sudden chest pain and shortness of breath. And the treatment is usually involves is the insertion a needle or chest tube between the ribs and remove the excess air. In case of the pneumothorax, risk factors are smoking, genetic, lung disease, mechanical ventilation, etc. Now, the external features of the lungs. Each lung has a narrow apex at the upper end, a broad concave base at the lower end, a convex costal surface next to the ribs, and a concave median surface. You can see in the picture. And the lungs are divided into two lobes. This is the left lung and right lung. The left lung has two parts, that is the left superior and left inferior lobe, while in case of the lungs it is divided into three parts, right superior, right middle and right inferior lobe. Now each lungs weigh about 450 grams. Left lung is smaller than the right lobe. In each lung, alveolar sac opens into alveoli or air sacs, and alveoli helps in gaseous exchange and pick up the incoming energy and releasing the outgoing waste product. So here the difference between the breathing and respiration. We know that breathing and respiration both are the same thing, but not. Breathing and respiration both are the two different things. Here you can see the difference in the breathing and respiration. Breathing is a physical process. That means it requires only the respiratory tract, while the respiration is a biochemical process. So, and breathing here, that does not release of any type of energy in case of the breathing, but in case of the respiration, energy release in the form of ATP. Breathing is an extracellular process, while respiration is intracellular process. There is no need of enzymes in breathing, but involvement of enzyme occurs in case of the respiration. In breathing, it is confined to certain organs only, because there is a respiratory tract here, so breathing occurs in the respiratory tract, but in case of the respiration it occurs in all cells of the body. So breathing is simply defined as the physical process in which oxygen is taken into the body and carbon dioxide is forced out from the body. And the mechanism of breathing in organism brought about by internal intercostal muscles, external intercostal muscle, diaphragm and the abdominal muscles. So here the question is, what is intercostal muscles? So intercostal muscles are several groups of muscles that runs between the ribs and help form and move the chest wall. These muscles help in expanding and shrinking the size of the chest cavity to facilitate breathing. Now, the process of breathing, which involves two phases. First one is the inspiration or inhalation, and second is expiration or exhalation. So, the first, that is inspiration. Inspiration is an active process, that means needs energy for the muscle contraction. It is the inhalation of air into lungs and is brought about by chest expanding. Diaphragm muscles and external intercostal muscles are called inspiratory muscles. You can see the picture. This is the process of inhalation, and during the inspiration the diaphragm is convex upward and peripheral muscles contract and lowers the diaphragm. Because of this, it makes the diaphragm flat. Now, the external intercostal muscles slant forward and downward between the ribs. Their contraction pulls the ribs and sternum upward and outward. This enlarges the thoracic cavity and the lungs expand simultaneously. Because of this, the lungs expand. The air pressure inside the lungs decreases, and to balance this air pressure, air starts to move into the lungs from the atmosphere through respiratory tract. So, it occurs when the volume of thoracic cavity increases and the air pressure decreases. Movement of fresh air into the lungs. You can see here what is the way by the fresh air moves into the lungs. So, it starts from the external layers to nasal chambers to internal layers, to pharynx, to glottis. From the glottis, it enters into larynx, then to trachea, then to bronchi, then bronchi to bronchioles, then bronchioles to alveolar duct, and from alveolar duct to alveoli. So, this is the movement of fresh air from the external layers to alveoli. This is the process of inspiration. Now, expiration. Expiration is the passive process, so it does not require the expenditure of energy. And in this process, it forcing off the air out from the lungs and is brought about by chest contracting. Abdominal and internal intercostal muscles are called expiratory muscles. During expiration, you can see the picture. This is the whole picture of the inhalation and exhalation process. During expiration, the diaphragm's muscle relax and comes to its original dome shape. Now, the external intercostal muscles relaxes and comes backward and upward. And the internal intercostal muscles contracts. Due to this, the ribs and sternum moves downward and inward. So, thoracic cavity decreases. Because of this, the lung size decreases, the air pressure inside the lungs increases, and to balance this air pressure, air starts expelled out from the lungs to the atmosphere through a respiratory tract. Now, the movement of fresh air into the lungs. Here, in case of the expiration, how the air move from the alveoli to the external layers. So, alveoli air moves from the alveoli to the alveolar duct, from here to bronchioles, from here to bronchi, from here to trachea, then larynx, glottis, pharynx, internal layers, nasal chamber, after that in external layers, and from here to expel it outside. So this is the whole mechanism of breathing in case of the human being. Now the mechanism of respiration, which means exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide into the body. It divided into following phases. First one is the external respiration, then transport of oxygen, internal respiration and transport of carbon dioxide. So the first is external respiration. In case of external respiration, you can see the picture here. It is the first step of respiration. It occurs in lungs. It is the exchange of gases by diffusion between alveoli and blood in blood vessels across respiratory membrane. So during inspiration, oxygen is taken into the lungs is higher than in blood capillaries. So the oxygen diffuses from the lungs to the blood. Similarly, the venous blood contains high level of carbon dioxide in comparison of lungs. Due to high partial pressure of carbon dioxide in blood and low carbon dioxide in lungs, the carbon dioxide diffuses from the blood into the lungs in order to maintain the equilibrium. Next is transport of oxygen. This is the figure of the transport of oxygen. You can see here, and the oxygen is transported from the lungs to the tissues in blood. Plasma and RBC are helpful in this process. Most of the oxygen is transported by RBC. About 97% of oxygen is transported by RBC because water present in plasma and has poor solubility for oxygen. So, it carries only 3% of total oxygen. RBC has a respiratory pigment, hemoglobin, which combines with oxygen to form oxyhemoglobin due to high affinity of hemoglobin with oxygen. Almost all the oxygen are transported in this form from lungs to tissue. Here, this oxyhemoglobin compound is highly unstable compound, and so it can dissociate quickly as it reaches to tissue. You know, one hemoglobin molecule contains 4 heme group. Each heme can combine with oxygen. So, in case of hemoglobin, one hemoglobin can combine with 4 molecules of oxygen. A normal adult person has 15 gram hemoglobin per 100 ml of blood. Now the third, that is internal respiration. This process occurs inside the cells, so it is known as tissue respiration. It completes in two steps. So first one is dissociation of oxyhemoglobin. As the oxyhemoglobin reaches to the tissue, it quickly dissociates into free oxygen and hemoglobin. And in first case, the oxygen enters into tissue, whereas the hemoglobin returns back to the RBC to pick up more oxygen. And the second is oxidation of food, that means tissue respiration. Here the oxygen oxidizes the glucose in the presence of respiratory enzymes and releases energy, water and carbon dioxide. Now here the glucose combined with oxygen to form carbon dioxide, water and energy. Energy is stored in the form of ATP in mitochondria to perform the metabolic activities. whereas the carbon dioxide is expelled from the tissue. This is the whole diagram of the internal respiration. Here CO2 and O2 movement you can see here from the blood plasma and interstitial fluid. Now the fourth one, that is the transportation of carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is the waste product, so it eliminates by the body by following ways. CO2 is the waste product. So which is the CO2 always produced in the body as a result of tissue respiration, and it is transported first in the form of carbonic acid. Carbon dioxide combines with water of RBC to form carbonic acid. You can see here, and this occur in the presence of an enzyme, that is carbonic anhydrase, and this enzyme is found in RBC, and about 7% of the total CO2 are transported in this form. Now in the form of bicarbonates, movement of carbon dioxide occur. About 70% of the carbon dioxide are transported in this form. In carbonic acid, quickly ionizes to form ions, that is bicarbonates and hydrogen ions. Bicarbonate ions are pumped through RBC membrane into plasma, and bicarbonates combined either sodium or potassium of plasma to form sodium bicarbonate or potassium bicarbonate respectively. And carbon dioxide is carried from tissues to the lungs through plasma. These bicarbonates are carried through plasma to lungs, where they combine with hydrogen ions and form water and carbon dioxide. The carbon dioxide is expelled out during expiration. And in the form of carbamino hemoglobin compound, about 20 to 23% of carbon dioxides are transported in this form. Here, the CO2 combines with amino group of hemoglobin to form a complex carbamino hemoglobin compound. So, this is the way of all the carbon dioxide produced in tissues are transported to lungs, from where it is expelled out through expiration. So, this is the end of this lecture. In this, we know about the human respiratory system. We will continue with more such tutorials, and stay tuned with this lecture series to get more knowledge about human physiology as well as other topics related to biology. If you understood this topic, please like and share it. For more such videos or tutorials, subscribe to my channel Anupma Biology Classes and click on bell icon to get the notifications and be a first viewer of my video. Thank you for watching the video. Let us know in the comment section how did you find this video. If you have any questions or suggestions, please ask in comment section below. Thank you so much.